Welcome to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt. New York style pizza is back on the rise, but what exactly does that mean? New York style pizza? And what makes it so beloved by so many people, not just New Yorkers? Ask 100 people and you'll probably get 101 different answers. But we're going to get to the bottom of this divisive yet alluring question with our guests in this episode, Kathleen Kennedy and Scott Wiener. Kathleen Kennedy is the Director of Culinary Innovation at Marco's Pizza, where she leads menu development and flavor innovation for one of America's fastest growing pizza brands. The last I heard, Marco's was the fifth largest pizza chain in the world. With more than 40 years of experience in the food industry, Kathleen has held executive chef, product development, and consulting roles for a number of globally recognized brands, including Kraft, Starbucks, and Walmart. At Marco's, she is known for driving bold, flavor-forward menu innovation, including the brand's acclaimed Magnifico lineup and fiery flavors offerings, while staying rooted in quality ingredients and authentic pizza craftsmanship. We'll find out more about all that in a moment. But I also want to welcome back our most frequent guest on Pizza Quest, the legendary Scott Wiener, our man on the street, and frankly, he's everywhere in the pizza world. Not only is he the founder of Scott's Pizza Tours in New York City, but also the co-founder of Slice Out Hunger, host of his own television shows, owner of the Guinness Book of Records for the world's largest pizza box collection, and really, he's the most knowledgeable guy I know about the history of pizza and pretty much everything else you would want to know about pizza. Scott recently took Kathleen and her colleagues on a tour of New York's finest New York-style pizzerias as part of her project at Marco's Pizza to create an authentic New York-style pizza for the over 1,000 Marco's pizzerias spread across the world. That limited time offer, LTO to those in the trade, is rolling out any day now. That's where we're going to start today's conversation. So welcome Kathleen Kennedy and Scott Wiener.
Thanks for having
Thank you,
us.
Peter.
It's good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
So tell us, how did you two get together? And Kathleen, what did you learn from Scott about New York style pizza?
So we got together because you introduced us at the Pizza Expo a couple of years ago.
That's right. That was the first time you came on Pizza Quest, was at that expo.
Yeah, and then right after, Scott seemed to be walking by and he said hello. And then I went to one of his talks later and he gave me a card. And so a year and a half later, when we were looking for someone to show us around New York City, I thought of him and called him and set this up. And, what he taught us was so very much. He taught us that New York pizza has its own following, has incredible offerings throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn and, all the boroughs.
Yeah.
And we learned things like usually they use flour instead of cornmeal on the bottom of a pizza, or a lot of them use chopped tomatoes instead of tomato sauce. And they use less cheese than most Americans put on their cheese, so the tomatoes come through. We learned all of that and more on our pizza tour, and I'm really grateful for Scott to showing us around New York.
Where are some of the places that you took Kathleen, Scott?
We started off at New York Pizza Suprema right by Madison Square Garden. I know you
Cool.
know that place. It's just like absolute classic, opened in the 60s, still owned by the same family. Joe is there every day. It's just one of those classic quintessential spots. And then we hit so many pizzerias and they were like, Joe's. We did not do John's because we were really specifically on the pizza by the slice, but we did Luigi's. We did a place called Il Porto in Brooklyn. We did J&V. I think we hit 18 pizzerias.
Let me ask you this: when you mentioned sort of these classic places, is Ray's, of which there are like hundreds of different variations of Ray's, is that considered New York style pizza?
It's definitely considered New York style pizza, but I think the Rays of yesteryear is gone. And the Rays that remain are the ones in the really touristy neighborhoods that tend to be over cheesed and undercooked. They're sort of part of the reason why I think New York style pizza fell away a little bit was because everybody visiting New York would get the perception that New York style pizza was this very cheesy, greasy, gooey, like the kind that you see in the movies.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
as Kathleen just said, some of her revelations during our tour were, oh, this is much simpler than I thought it was. And Ray's
Right.
sort of represents the abundance, and the reality is the opposite.
So what were you looking for in particular, Kathy? Because in order for Marcos to want to bring New York style pizza in, there must be something happening in that category. Your customers have got to be saying, "We'd like to see New York style pizza." So
They
what were the
were.
takeaways? Yeah.
So they were saying that, we talk to consumers on a regular basis, and we ran a consumer screen to say what kind of crust would you be interested in. And New York was number four of, after a couple stuffed crusts and some other stuff. And it was the most accessible one, really. And so we were trying to decide, how do we take our pizza that we have today, and if we made a New York pizza, is that doable in our restaurants? And is it doable with our current dough? And we learned, yes, we're never going to match New York completely, because New York slice shops cook the pizza on a sheet tray, and then take each slice and bake it. So they're really twice baked,
Mm.
and they're extra crispy on the bottom, and they're thin. And so we did do thinner dough than we normally do on Marco's pizzas, but we can't get that double cooked
Hmm.
crispness. That's partially why you use the flour. So that was one of the things. So extra thin,
Mm.
but foldable. That's a mainstay of New York pizza.
Interesting. Key. It's like a key identifier that's foldable.
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay, so well, this brings up like I think an important discussion for us, because we've got Scott, who you know every independent pizza operator in the United States and in the world, and know the different styles and the different ways they do it. And Kathleen, you represent sort of a whole other category. There's really two categories of pizza. There's the major chains and there's the independents. The major chains, of which maybe there are 5 or 10, as we've been told by PMQ, the guys there, that 50% of the pizza sold in this country is coming from the chains, and the other 50% is from the thousands of independent operators. So
Mhm.
you're seeing, so you have a totally different challenge at your chain at Marco's, where you've got all these shops all over the country, where you have to kind of make every experience as similar. If somebody steps into a Marco's in Denver, it has to be comparable to the one that they're going to have in Buffalo, et cetera, et cetera. How do you make that happen? What are the challenges, for instance, you've got a particular kind of oven. It's probably different from the kind of oven that the New York
Yes.
pizza operators that you saw with
Yes.
Scott are using. How do
So
you deal with
most
that?
of the ovens were deck ovens on our New York pizza tour. We use a conveyor oven. And our conveyor oven has top and bottom heat, whereas I think a lot of the heat on the deck oven's coming from the bottom.
Mm.
Um, what we learned was we're never going to match exactly, but what we wanted to do was have an ode to New York pizza
Uh-huh.
independence. So we're a little bit in between, because we're not the top four, and we're the fifth largest.
Uh-huh.
And the top four all have, tens of thousands of stores. We have about 1,260 right now. And so, and growing every day, we're going
Yeah.
to add about 80 this year. But so we try to be inspired by the independents, but put in processes like the big four. However, we have a little more hands-on with our dough and our ingredients than most of our competitors in the big four.
Yeah, because each shop they're making it their own dough and everything else, right?
Yeah,
So
we make our own dough, we
yeah.
make our own sauce. We don't use frozen cheese. I don't know that Americans know that a lot of our competitors use frozen pizza cheese. It's not even, like mozzarella, or
Mhm.
it doesn't have it's not in the code of federal regulations as a named cheese.
Some kind of a blend. Yeah. Well, Scott, when you were working with Kathleen on this, and you're showing her what New York pizza is, and it can your major sort of demographic are the independents, so you could bring some of that knowledge to her. But were you able to help her think through how to make those applications from what she saw at the places you'd brought her to into a situation where they're using conveyor ovens or using a different, process?
Well, I knew that once Kathleen saw the method of production and was able to get a baseline of information by visiting a couple dozen pizzerias, I knew
Yeah.
that she would immediately start figuring out what needed to be done because
Hmm.
Kathleen is the expert of the Marco's kitchen, and I knew very little about it. I had never been to a Marco's until recently, really.
Well,
So
it's like New
I
York is
didn't.
the one place where you're not going to see chain pizzerias. There's so many
Right.
pizzerias that the chains don't even come into New York City.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have the chains, but they don't really factor in. And the closest Marco's is, an hour away from where I live. So
Hmm.
it was really interesting process. I I didn't need to offer up any possible solutions because Kathleen was, or I could watch her. You could see it in her eyes that she was thinking about, okay,
The
well,
wheels.
like she had a specific type of oven, a specific dough. I think the restrictions of what Marco's is doing and how to bring in a new product to that system
Uh-huh.
are the things that help. Because of course there are tons of solutions. You can say, oh well, we're going to put a preheated stone onto the conveyor belt, and then we're going to bake the pizza on that, and there's no chance it's not going to
Hmm.
happen. The restrictions were kind of nice. So my job was more of to just explain what is the heart and soul. Because as you
Hmm.
said, I work with these independents. I don't have a deep interest in what the chains do, but
Hmm.
Marco's exists in that portion of the chains where
In
it's
between.
the smallest of these big ones. It's by no means small. But when I say Marco's to people in New York City,
Yeah.
a lot of people have never heard of it. And when I say, well, it's the number 5 in the country, they're blown away. So
Yeah,
that's why
they've heard of
Marcos has
Pizza Hut,
this,
but they haven't heard of Marcos.
of
Yeah.
course. And
So,
Marcos
so
has this ability to be flexible. And that's a thing that I think the big giant ones don't have that maneuverability.
And I think it's interesting to note, I'll just throw this in as a side because I want to get back to the nuts and bolts of what makes New York pizza, but is that I've just read an article just a couple days ago that all the chains above Marco's, every one of them is starting to shut down shops and reduce the number of
Mhm.
outlets, whereas Marco's is continuing to grow. So you must be doing something right. You're onto something that they're not onto, or maybe they overexpanded, but and we'll kind of come back and circle back to what that is in a second. But let's just kind of drill deep into what is New York. What's the heart and soul of New York pizza, if you could put it in some kind of a nutshell?
Well, to me, a New York style pizza, first of all, real easy nuts and bolts. Round,
Hmm.
large format. So this is not a personal pizza. This is a sharing pizza. Large slices. It has a thin center, but a slightly puffed edge.
Hmm.
It's flexible and foldable and able to be eaten on the go. And one slice can either be a snack or a meal, depending on the diner. And that's essentially it. It's a low moisture mozzarella. It's a very simple crushed tomato as the sauce, little to no seasoning involved. And it's the kind of pizza that stands on its own. It does not require the addition of 15 toppings to be enjoyable.
Now, I'm going to just drill a little bit deeper for those people who are listening. A segment of our listenership are going to be the pizza geeks who like want to go even, to the heart and soul of everything. So, one of the questions that comes up a lot with New York style pizza is, does it have to be high gluten flour? Does it have to be bromated flour? Does it have to be
Mhm.
unbleached for bleached flour? Are those things that you see happening in New York and questions that are grappled with there?
Well, first of all, I would say that the true pizza nerd does not see a requirement of ingredient. It's more of a requirement of result. And so I
Ah,
always, in judging pizza, we always train judges at these competitions. You judge what's on the plate. You don't judge what somebody told you was their ingredient or their process. Because if you give me a pizza that fits the standard of New York style pizza, but you used an Italian 00 flour, I'd say, great. The knowledge of what flour you used should not change the definition
mhm.
of the food. So I would say rather than say it has to be high gluten flour, it has to be crisp on the outside, but flexible and chewy. It has to pull back a little bit when you take a bite. And that's
That's
basically it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, but some of these other things, like the fact that it's usually crushed tomatoes and things like that, again, not required, but kind of, identified with that style of pizza.
Yeah, I would say that there is such a thing as good New York style pizza and bad New York style pizza. And
Mm.
it just because it's bad does not mean it's not New York style. But
Right.
usually the better ones are a simpler sauce and the really harshly, like when I eat, if I'm in another city and I see that there's a New York style pizzeria, I'm always curious to see, well, what's their definition? And when
Yeah,
it's this like
exactly.
heavy, robust, garlicky, heavy, everything, I realize that, okay, well, this person has not actually eaten in these pizzerias in New York where it's much simpler than you'd imagine.
Uh-huh.
Simplicity is part of it.
So Kathleen, with all the things that Scott just said, in sort of I kind of painting the picture of what establishes a New York style pizza, what were some of the things that you did to innovate for Marco's?
Well, so when I came back from the tour, I started out by trying to make the perfect gold standard, you know, no holds bar, extra thin, small amount of sauce. I used the same type of sauce. I used the cheese from New York, which was grande cheese. Um, and I made the gold standard.
Well, by the way,
From
did you, of
there,
all those places you visited, did you have one or two places that you would like put on your top of the list? These were my two favorite places,
um,
or were they all
so I
so
have two
close?
favorites for sure. Lindustry
The industry's been getting a lot of buzz these days. Yeah.
and one that wasn't in New York called Raza.
Oh, yeah, in Jersey. But would you call that New York style pizzas? Do they call it
No,
New York style
but it was
pizza?
my favorite. It was just my favorite. It
Yeah,
was like corn and chili, corn off the cob and chili. So
yes.
it wasn't New York, but that was my favorite out of everything that we tested. Um,
We've had Dan Richer on Pizza Quest. Did you get to meet him while you were there?
no, I didn't.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, he's like one of the big rock stars now in the pizza world. So I'm glad you got
Yeah,
to
he
go
was,
there.
I mean, his pizza was amazing. It wasn't New York. That's a good point, but it was amazing. It was sourdough crust, which I know you think is a big trend,
Well, yeah,
coming down the pike.
but you're not going to see that in New York style pizza, or are you, Scott?
Right.
Is
Well,
anybody doing New York style pizza with sourdough crust?
well, Lindustry uses sourdough.
L'Industrie is doing it. Okay,
Yeah. Ceres
well, that
uses
was one of your top
sourdough.
favorite ones. Yeah.
So that's interesting that I tend toward to liking the sourdough, but
Well, we'll talk more about that later because yeah, that's a hot topic for me. But again, sticking close to what your takeaways were and the things that you're able to apply, and in a multi-unit operation like Marco's using different ovens. Are you now as Marco's when they roll out and by the way, what's the rollout date for the New York style pizza at
it
Marco's?
rolled out 2 weeks ago.
It's already out. Okay, and it will be out for what, through the summer or for a couple months or what?
Yeah, through the summer.
So it's kind of in beta mode now. If people like it, maybe they'll keep it on the menu, or what do you think?
Um, so I'm not totally sure about that. We'll have to see. They're talking about maybe keeping it on the menu as a crust, not necessarily keeping it with the tomatoes or as a New York pizza, but a New York
Uh-huh.
crust, which would
Uh-huh.
be we take a 14-ounce dough ball and then we stretch it past. Normally our 14-ounce dough ball would have a 12-inch pizza, would
Hmm.
be for a 12-inch pizza, and we stretch it past the 14-inch, which is the large, to the 16-inch. So it's like double stretched.
So much thinner than the normal Marco's pizza. How does it stand up in the box? Because most people are coming to Marco's, they're taking the pizza home with them. They're taking it in a box. So how does that thinner pizza work in a box?
Well,
And
it works good. We cut it into 6 pieces. So normally we would cut an extra
oh,
large into 8 pieces. So we cut this pizza into 6 pieces. We
wow.
also are using deli pepperoni, which we only saw in one or two shops, but the visual was it was such a determination that this is a different style pizza when you look at it, that
Uh-huh.
we thought it made sense from a chain perspective to
Yeah.
use the deli style pizza.
What is
The other
deli
thing
style?
is,
What is deli style pepperoni then? How's that different?
it's thinner. It has like these little crinkly edges, as Scott talked about on a video that we made, where it kind of crisps up. But it's an extra large sausage. It's a pretty bold flavored extra large sausage,
Ah,
and it's very
interesting.
thinly sliced.
So it's not those small little cupping pepperonis then, huh?
No, we have those too. We just don't have them on the New York.
Right. Well, but that's interesting that you differentiate in the pepperonis themselves. Yeah.
Yes. We have four types of pepperoni in the store right now.
So these are like the kind of things that big operations have to think about because, one little change in anything that you do has huge implications.
Right. The supply chain has to buy for, the 1,260 locations. Some of them are in Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, Mexico, but most are in the States. But
Are
yes,
you you're buying a lot of cheese? I know you buy a lot of cheese and you say it's not frozen cheese. So is it mainly mozzarella and are you using the same cheese on your New York style?
so we call it our signature cheese blend. So it's three standard of identity cheeses, but we don't share the exact recipe.
Sure.
So we use that now. Most of the New York, we're using straight mozzarella with some, I think Reggiano on top. Is that correct, Scott? Was that?
Yeah, I think you're using Parmesan Reggiano. Or no, you might be using Pecorino.
Oh, you're right. It's Pecorino.
Yeah.
So I went back and I tried it with Pecorino, but then I decided our Parmesan was, a good enough. Really, restraint in the cheese world is partially what I figured you need to do to get a good New York pizza. Because as Scott said, it really isn't overly seasoned. And really, I think it's meant that you could put salt, pepper, and oregano on it yourself if you were so inclined. Is that correct, Scott?
Yeah, there's so much about after the slice is handed over the counter, the shakers on the tables are how you season it.
So everybody, yeah, because I always used to put lots of like pepper flakes on it, and
Yeah, pepper
if they
flakes.
had any granulated garlic, I'd put that on mine, and oregano, a little splash of oregano too.
So we put a little garlic sauce on ours, which I know to Scott was a little bit outside of the New York. It's how we Marcoized ours, I think. We have a kind of a yummy garlic sauce. We put that on the crust only. But I think overall, I'm really proud of what we put out. And I feel like the feedback from consumers has been really overwhelmingly positive.
Have you had a chance yet, Scott, to go to a Marco's and try their iteration of a New York style pizza?
Yeah, I finally went to a Marco's, and the first Marco's I had was the New York style, and then I followed that up with the standard Marco's. And yeah, the New York style was, I think they nailed what they were trying to do. As Kathleen just said, they did Marcoize it, so I wasn't looking for it to be. Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be a replacement for Joe's or for Lindustry, but like they definitely, from what their standard pizza is, they absolutely made a different style with the New York.
Interesting. Well, Kathleen, I want to go back to something I read in your intro. You've got a line of something called the Magnifico lineup and the fiery flavors. Can you explain what that is? That's kind of a Marcoized concept.
It
What
is. It's bold flavored pizza that is finished with our traditional crust, garlic sauce, and then what we call Romajan, which is a combination of Parmesan Reggiano and Roman and Italian seasonings in it. So that's all mixed up with the Parmesan, and it's very yeasty. It's very umami, and it goes on the crust. But the main one is a cupping pepperoni with a classic pepperoni that's called the pepperoni magnifico. We had a triple pepperoni magnifico where we added some of the Canadian style strips on top of it. So we had three types of pepperoni. And then we also had a margarita magnifico, which was how we did a margarita pizza with fresh mozzarella and a basil slurry that just drizzled all over the pizza with tomatoes, and the freshness came through. And it was a pizza that people have been asking about 2 years later. So we're going to have to relaunch that.
Wow.
Because it was so fresh.
Do any of those concepts work on the New York style? Do you use the garlic brush and this and that on the New York style pizza to Marcoize it?
We used the garlic on it, but none of the others. Now, we did find that, we have the signature pizzas where you put, 4 to 5 toppings on it and really build it up. We can't do that with the New York style pizza because of the thinness of the center and the way that it folds.
Right.
Decided that you could really only put 3 toppings on. So we do have the wide pepperoni, and you could add 2 more toppings to that. So you could get the cupping pepperoni instead or in addition if you wanted to on the New York, but you can't get more than 3 total toppings.
That's interesting that you put a limit on it like that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But and I think I asked earlier, how does it hold up in the box? I'm sure you've tested that. If people get one taken home, what are they going to find when they open the box?
So in general, pizza delivery gets to your house within 30 minutes of the pie being made.
Uh-huh.
And so, from a chef perspective, I wish it was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But, that's not how most people eat it. So it's still warm.
Yeah.
It's still slightly crisp on the bottom. I think if you could put it on a stone for a couple minutes in an oven, that's going to bring the crispness back even more. But I don't think most people, they just want to eat it.
Yeah.
They're not as picky as I am or as Scott is, I don't think.
But that's a really good point that you made, because if they wanted to really be closer to what they might get if they're getting a slice over the counter, at one of the New York places, they then to throw it into a hot oven on a stone for a couple of minutes to re-crisp the bottom would make it much more like a New York style slice, wouldn't it?
Agreed.
Have you printed those instructions on the box? That sounds like maybe we're onto something here.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I think it for
pass
any
it on
pizza.
to the hierarchy there. How do decisions get made in a large company like yours, where decisions made somewhere at headquarters, which is where, in the Midwest somewhere, and then it rolls out across the country and into other countries? How is quality control maintained? And these are different challenges that independent pizzerias have. Although some of the guys, like Tony's doing slice shops now, he's got to ride herd on a number of locations, but quality control and consistency seems to be a big issue.
Well, we have a full-time quality manager who's an excellent guy and oversees the quality of the company, and the supply chain team does a great job making sure that the supply, comes unadulterated through the process, and they order just what we need and not too much more. Those are some types of the processes. We also have a stage gate process where I believe my job is to inspire the rest of the teams, the cross-functional teams, with the different pizzas and the options, and then let them kind of pick and choose what things they want to launch. My boss is in charge of the stage gate process, and he is vice president of innovation and channels, associate vice president of innovation and channels, and he leads the leadership team through tastings, where I bring the food and talk about the choices that we've made in our recommendations, and then really him and the supply chain and the cross-functional group narrow down what we're going to show to the leadership, the CEO, the CMO. And then at the end of the day, they all kind of vote on what we are going to move forward with.
So that's interesting. So the two of you start out as kind of a team, an educational process for everybody down line to bring them, into the vision that you've got for this and how to best enjoy it, how to best to sell it even.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. Well, these are things that I know that Steve Green years ago, when we had him on Pizza Quest, when he was at PMQ, told us that the one thing that independent pizza operators really need to learn from the chains is what you just described, the process of how you work, how you think in terms of, scaling up and marketing and things like that you don't normally think of when you're just a solo operator.
Right. I mean, it's a team effort. So while Alex and I were the ones that went to New York and met with Scott, we brought it back, and then we have someone that is a commercialization expert and the supply chain experts. And, we have digital people and menu people that have to program the menu boards for everyone. We have people that take pictures of, whole food styling teams and graphic teams. I mean, it takes a village, a lot of people to make it come to fruition for 1,260 restaurants. It's a real team effort.
Absolutely. And again, that consistency is the key. It's got to be the same in every Marcos that you go in. Just to give our viewers and listeners perspective about how much cheese does it take to, run a Marcos in a given day or month?
I wish I knew.
Because I think we talked about that like, a couple of
Millions.
years ago. Yeah, it's like
We're in the
and
millions of pounds.
is this cheese all pretty much American cheese? Is it coming from a couple cheese companies? How do how does
It does. It's
and
coming
that
from a
blend?
couple of cheese companies. We have some really great cheese partners out there, and they make all these standard of identity cheeses and they blend them for us. And then we also work with specialty cheesemakers like a Belgioso,
Uh,
who makes our fresh mozzarella.
uh,
Um, and so we have the standard of identity cheeses. Then we actually use an American cheese on one product called a Pizzoli, which is a rolled up pizza, kind of
oh,
like your old Strombolis that you used to make.
yeah, yeah.
But it's a little horn and it's got American cheese and pizza signature cheeses.
Interesting.
So it's got a great mouth feel and it's a good individual portion for great for luncheons or something. But millions upon millions of pounds.
Yeah, and the same with the tomatoes. I imagine you have the sauces, tomatoes sourced and blended for you as well. Do you have like a
We
Marco's
do.
blend that every shop gets?
We do. We have like it's a base concentrate and then we add, oil and water and mix it up really well.
Uh,
And it's based on the founder's grandmother's recipe. So the
I remember
founder
that
is
now.
from
Yeah,
Italy and it's based on his grandmother's recipe. And the dough is based on his family's recipes. So, I mean, it's very, I think one of the difference between us and the other, you know, big four is that we really are rooted in tradition from
hmm,
Italy, and so you're not probably going to see a taco pizza on our menu. You're probably more likely going to see a margarita or a New
yeah.
York or something that appeals to the masses, but not too Americanized.
Interesting. Well, that's one thing that we often forget is these large chains. They all started with one location somewhere, and usually have an origin story. And then the larger the chains got, the further and further many of them got from the origin story itself. But it sounds like Marcos is keeping that the connection to your origins alive.
Yeah, our founder is still very much, a part of the group. He still owns, 15 or 20 stores himself in Toledo, and he's in charge of the Toledo market menu.
Interesting. Well, listen, before we run out of time, I want to give Scott a chance to just chime in. Scott, if there's any advice that you could give to Marcos or companies like Marcos that want to bring, the quote, the experience of the authentic New York style pizza into their operation, any tips that you could give or pointers?
Kathleen and the Marcos crew in general did a great job of isolating and understanding what was important about the pizza in New York and how really simplicity was probably the big one word takeaway.
Ah,
And so the best advice is for any style of pizza, whatever you're trying to replicate, to really try to understand not just what it should look like, because we all scroll through TikTok and Instagram and we see these things. Really get an understanding of what it feels like, what it tastes like, and what it makes you feel like yourself. And I think that's the
Hmm.
biggest key to it is it's anybody can make a pizza that looks like a Detroit style pizza. That's not hard. But to one that eats like one and is a good one, that's
uh-huh.
very
Hmm.
hard. You know better than anybody. You wrote a whole book about it basically.
Yeah.
And it's not things are not always what they look like because it's
Hmm.
food. And that means that there's texture and there's flavor and there's an experience of eating something. So that's what Marcos is doing with this project.
That's
So,
awesome. Well,
Scott,
yeah.
a quick question for Scott. What do you say to those people that say the water in New York is needed to make a real New York pizza?
I would say to those people, there are 2,300 pizzerias in New York, and most of them are not good. And they're all using the same water. So it ain't the water.
So it is,
That's
it
funny.
is, or isn't? You said it isn't the water?
No way. I've
Okay.
had terrible pizzas in New York, and I've had great pizzas outside of New York. Anytime somebody tells me it's, oh, it's actually just because of the water, all I have to do is ask them to explain the science, and then you'll see a blank stare.
Yeah.
Because the reality of New York water is that it doesn't have minerals that nobody else has. In fact, it has very little in it. Our total mineral content is pretty low, but not the lowest. And our chlorine content is pretty low, but not the lowest. If your water doesn't taste bad, then it will make you a good bread product. And water is an incredibly important ingredient, but uh, having water that's from New York is not the silver bullet, and having water that's not in New York does not make your pizza worse. It's just the worse of a baker you are, the more you're likely to blame it on the water.
Right. Well, hold on, I'm gonna. Somebody's trying to call through while I'm doing a show here, so I'm gonna cut that phone off. But let me. This is a great place to end because I think what I want to do is continue this conversation with the two of you, but we're gonna do it in a separate recording. And for those of you who are listening, look on Instagram and YouTube for little shorts that we're gonna get from Kathleen and Scott that we'll post up there, over the next few weeks, that will kind of continue this conversation into some of the things that we didn't get to ask in this limited amount of time we had today. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, please join us again each and every week when we do more interviews on Pizza Quest. And thank you, Scott Wiener, Kathleen Kennedy, for joining us in today's episode. I think, I learned a lot, actually, and things that I didn't know about these sort of defining qualities of New York style pizza. And for those of you who get a chance, check out the New York version at Marco's while it lasts, because it's just a limited time experiment, so to speak. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you in future episodes of Pizza Quest, and maybe see you at some of the pizza expos coming up.